Welcome to AP Environmental Science. In this video, we are going to talk briefly about survivorship curves, and this corresponds with Module 19 in your textbook. Survivorship curves are just a way to visualize the overall survival rate of a particular species. And we break that species down into cohort or age groups, and it's really trying to measure, of all the individuals in that particular cohort, how many of them make it to each age bracket. So here's an example with oak trees. So we're assuming that the maximum age of this particular population is 55 years old. Now we know that oak trees live to be much, much larger, but this is just for an example. And say within this particular group that we're looking at, the starting population is 150 individuals. So we can look at this particular table and we say our initial population, we had 100% surviving to this age. Then our next cohort, so the age at death, is between 0 and 5 years. And we're saying that 100 individuals died during that particular time period, only 50 survived, so that means we have a 33% survival rate at that particular age. Then from the age bracket of 5 to 10 years, so we're looking at how many individuals died in that age bracket. So we had 20 individuals dies, so now we're down to 30 surviving individuals out of our initial 150, so we have a 20% survival rate. And this number of survivors continues to go down because, again, you don't have new individuals magically show up out of nowhere until our percent surviving to a particular age is at 0. Now you can then graph this information and you have your age across the x-axis and the percent survivors or the number of survivors on the y-axis. And if that number of survivors stays pretty high for quite some time until you get to old age and it drops down, that's when you have a type 1 survivorship curve. If the chance of dying at any age is pretty consistent, then you have a type 2 survivorship curve. And if most individuals die really young and very few reach old age, then you have a type 3 survivorship curve. Now our survivorship curves correlate a little bit to our R-selected versus K-selected species. So remember, K-selected species, these are things like rodents and mussels and insects. They have very little parental care, they tend to have a lot of offspring, and a lot of individuals die very young. So those would experience a type 3 survivorship curve. So you would see that there are a lot of individuals that are very young, but pretty quickly that population dies off and very few reach maturity and reach old age. Now species that are K-selected, those tend to have a type 1 survivorship curve. Those are things like humans and elephants. So if you think of elephants, it takes them many years before they reach maturity. And once they do reach maturity, they only have one offspring at a time, and it takes them a long time to raise that offspring to maturity, a lot of effort, and they tend to have a pretty high success rate. So a lot of their offspring reach maturity. So they're going to have that pretty high survivorship rate until they reach old age, and that's when they tend to die off. So in summary, survivorship curves are a way to summarize the average lifespan of a population or species. Now I want to remind you that a species does not typically fall into neat little categories. A species might not be exactly at a type 1 survivorship curve, even though they live a pretty long time. So you might see some variation in this. Also remember, K-selected species tend to follow that type 1 curve, whereas R-selected tend to follow the type 3 curve. So if you have any questions on this information, feel free to reach out to me and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And I hope that as you watch this video, you were able to learn something.